Today in the TheSavageGoose Show, we're going to talk about Savage Worlds in the context of player-driven or mechanics-driven versus narrative-driven players, and how Savage Worlds kind of bridges the gap between the two. But first, let's talk about the newsletter. Today's newsletter, the 30th anniversary Kickstarter for Deadlands is over. If you did not back it, you can still go ahead and late pledge, but it is currently, quote unquote, over for now. And they were quite successful. Let's see, I'm double checking the last project numbers, $350,000 to help bring this project to life. So looking forward to seeing all of those books out there, the anniversary books, the anniversary cover books for the special covers for the rules, the star sets. I'm really looking forward to seeing the star set. I think the thing I'm most excited about is actually the star set. So looking forward to seeing all of this great stuff coming to our homes at some point within hopefully the next year. They are going to get some final things on editing done, and then those books will be sent to us via PDF first, and then we can expect to get those physical versions later once all the edits are done, and then since printer copies are proofed and all that, and then they'll get shipped over. So I look forward to that. The Deadlands 30th anniversary celebration event that's happening in October in Arizona is still has some tickets available for that. So if you're interested in that event, you can go ahead and go over and check out those tickets for that event. Especially for those of you who are near Arizona, you're going to have a much easier time probably getting there. If you are able to, definitely go check out that event. The Pathfinder for Savage Worlds Bestiary 2 is now on Foundry. So if you are using the Foundry VTT, you can get the Bestiary 2. It has all the 160 new monsters in there. So check out that. And yeah, especially for those of you who use Foundry. This week on the Savage Universe, they are going to be talking with Alb from with James Foggy. It was talking with Alb from Big Bad Wolf, Here Be Dragons, for an overview of all the entries from this year's Fast Furious Fun February Creator Jam. You may have seen some products come out the past few weeks over the past month that go over some different ideas people have for Savage Worlds and going over the Creator Jam. So look forward to seeing a lot of those, and we'll probably see a lot of these also in the September bundle as well. But go over to the YouTube or Twitch stream to check out that stream with Alb. Bloodlines for Savage Worlds is now available on Steam and Fantasy Grounds. This is from 12 to midnight. It's an adventure that takes place in Pine Box, Texas, the same place as ETU or Pine Box Middle School. It's a 3-part mini campaign for Savage Worlds. So they expect to be about 20 hours of play. So 19 pages of player handouts and a bunch of stuff. So if you're interested in that, for Fantasy Grounds is now available. If you are a Gamma member, consider putting in your vote for Christopher Landauer for Publisher Board Representative. That is what Pinnacle is asking for today. There's a lot of good stuff going over, why he's interested in doing that. And I think it sounds like they had a lot of fun based on what I've heard and just talking to other people as well. I was at a board game store recently where they went to Gamma, and they was like, hey, yeah, we're kind of backed up on stuff because we're just got back from Gamma. So look forward to that, and just enjoy Gamma stuff. And if you are a member of Gamma and you're interested in maybe voting for Christopher Landauer, here's some good reasons why. As far as Kickstarters are concerned and crowdfunding, Europa Canada is shipping. Oz and New Zealand is with Afterworks. I guess that's one of their distributors. EU, UK, and our rest of the world is with GMS. Same thing for Deadlands Lost Colony. The Doomguard final files have been delivered to printer, which means that things will be closing soon, but Pledge Manager is open currently. Deadlands Dark Ages also has the Pledge Manager open. Pathfinder Carrying Crown has its feedback closed, but final files are out. And Deadlands 30th Anniversary late pledges are still open. So if you're interested in late pledging for that, you still can do that. Go check that out. All right, so I didn't actually have any new products to talk about, so we're actually going to skip this one to kickstart that earlier. We only have 2 Kickstarters to talk about, and that is Vermilium, Outlaw Girls, and Cannibal Elves. I did talk to Ben, and he said this is slightly delayed just because they've been doing some moving, but it does sound like there is some progress happening with this still, and he still plans on doing this Kickstarter, so look forward to that, especially if you're into Vermilium. I'm really enjoying my campaign still, and we're just going through the Sick of the Dead. The Sick of the Dead, yeah, the Sick of the Dead. We're currently, and I think we're heading towards, I think, a finale of sorts. So we'll see what happens with that. And then we also spoke a couple weeks ago with Brandon over at Star Anvil Studios to talk about Phase World, which is part of this Rifts dimensions. So if you're interested in Rifts and you're just in Phase World, check out that. Both links to both those Kickstarters are down below, so you can follow them so you can be made aware when they do release. All right, so today's main topic, we're talking about Savage Worlds for All, how Savage Worlds handles both mechanics-driven and narrative-driven players. One of the discussions I get into a lot with some game designers that I talk to, or people who are into like follow game design as a hobby of sorts, is the discussion of like narrative versus simulationist or mechanics heavy games. And I like to think about like where does Savage Worlds kind of put itself on this spectrum of like mechanics driven or narrative driven. And in my opinion, Savage Worlds does a great job of kind of bridging that gap and allowing for both kinds of players, allowing for players who are very mechanics or maybe very tactical, but also allowing for players who are very invested into the narrative of the game. So today I want to kind of go through in no particular order, just kind of like why I think that, what kind of lends itself to being able to do that. And some of the mechanics that may be more on the narrative side, or some of the mechanics that are more on the mechanical side, and why I think Savage Worlds does a good job of kind of like blending the two and allowing you to do both. I'm going to remove this here. There we go. There's, again, there's no particular order to this. I will say I did not have intentions of originally streaming tonight. I was supposed to go to a soccer game tonight, and that got canceled due to the very cold weather and the snow that's happening here in Pittsburgh. So you get me tonight. So this is a little bit thrown together, a little bit last minute, but I still think it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. So we'll have a little bit of that in mind, but it may not be as structured as I would like this to usually be. And because of that, I'll probably make a video out of this at some point and just post it as a normal long form video. But I want to get your opinions on this as well. So leave comments down below. Tell me what you think about the kind of the ends of the spectrum of like mechanics driven and narrative driven, where you stand, why you think Savage Worlds does a good job kind of being somewhere in that middle ground. So first off, let's talk about exploding dice and step dice. Obviously, step dice, I think that's two of the big things people see about Savage Worlds is, okay, whoa, my dice go up one dice at a time. It's how I level it up, and they can explode. That's really cool. And it allows for some really crazy moments that I would say goes to more of an emergent storytelling. So unlike some like other games like maybe Powered by Apocalypse or Fate, that where it's very player driven story, it's still a traditional role playing that the GM kind of sets up something and the players are reacting to it. But because of the way the dice are, because of the explosions that can happen, raises, all that kind of thing, it can allow for some really crazy moments that emerge from those dice, and then you have to narrate what happens. It allows the players, the narrative players, to interpret the results, or for the GM to interpret the results. But it also allows the tactical player or the mechanical player to kind of like give it something to work with to manage. It can kind of more mechanic driven players are going to still be able to mess with those probabilities by using bennies or using modifiers for either bigger hits or more success, higher success rates, whatever it be, and or working with opposed rolls. And there's plenty of room there with the step dice to kind of increase that success. And one of the things I actually noticed doing some research for this video is that one thing that's pointed out is that as you go up in die level, there's actually, if you start with a D4, you have a wild die. D4 is your base die, and you have like a 67% chance of a success. Let me pull up that stat right quick. But I want to say it's like 67% chance of a success. And when you, the highest, when you get all the way to a D12, your success probability, so 62.5, and when you get all the way to D12, it goes up to an 87.5, which is only about, it's actually exactly 25% difference between your lowest die type and your highest die type. Now, we're not taking into account any modifiers or anything, so keep that in mind. But what really happens when you raise that die type is you're increasing your likelihood of a raise more so. So going from increasing from a D4 all the way to D12 goes from a 15.6% chance of a raise all the way up to a 45.3% chance of raise. So you're going from I guess that'd be 1 in not 1 in 10, but be 1 in math, 1 in 7-ish, 1 in 6, 1 in 7, somewhere around there. Chance of getting a raise to a more closer to a half the time getting a raise. Again, not looking at anything, any particular modifiers or anything, taking this into account. So it gives more tactical players, more mechanical driven players, I should say, more room to work with modifiers, but still allows for there to be these explosions and this fun stuff that happens, even with the narrative players having some emergent storytelling. Okay, so what else? Well, I mentioned bennies already. Where both mechanics players and narrative players are going to be really excited about bennies. Bennies are a resource for for mechanics driven players. Bennies are a resource that is to be managed and is a safety net against the swinginess of dice. But for the narrative driven player, they are the reward for character performances. And because they're given out by GMs for role playing hindrances or doing cool moments and stuff, it incentivizes players to role play their weaknesses more so they can get those bennies. And it allows the narrative players to be more successful at the more narrative things that they want the outcome for. Oh, I really wanted to successfully pet that cat, for example. I definitely didn't have a player who spent 3 bennies trying to make sure that they befriended a cat. No, wait. Yes, I did. So the bennies really allow players to succeed at the things that they want to succeed at. If they want to succeed at more of a narrative thing or more social thing, they can, or they can use the bennies to succeed at more mechanic-driven, narrative, tactical, combat-y things as well. Okay, so let's talk about combat then. How does combat kind of work for both? Well, combat in Savage Worlds, I think, is actually rather tactical. Yes, it can be over quickly. I would say usually is over within 3 rounds, but it is very tactical. Positioning matters. The options you have available to you matter. But also, it's a flexible enough combat system that allow the narrative player to do something narratively, and then the GM still has plenty of tools to turn what that player does narratively into a mechanic that actually has a real effect on that combat. Now, I'm going to jump to quick encounters real quick, because this is kind of where quick encounters is where you kind of can use this to decide, are you in a more gritty game or a more tactical oriented game or mechanic oriented game or a more narrative driven game. Quick encounters are great because it allows you, if you have a group that is more narrative driven, to quickly resolve a combat without getting into the muck, but still have narrative consequences that consequences that happen both narratively and mechanically, even though you're getting it out of the way much quicker. So Savage Worlds gives you the tools to make things more narrative and push the narrative forward quicker without having to spend that time in combat, if that's the kind of thing that your players want to do. Along with that, and there's some other subsystems I want to talk about. We mentioned dramatic tasks. One of the things I love dramatic tasks. Dramatic tasks are probably my favorite subsystem in Savage Worlds. It's definitely the one I like to use the most. I think quick encounters probably happens more often, but I love using dramatic tasks. Dramatic tasks allow you the dramatic task is like just narratively fun. I think it's how well does this thing that you're trying to do go, and narrating all the different things and steps you're doing to accomplish that task, whatever that is, and then rolling those dice to see what the consequences or the results of your attempt is. But at the same time, it also allows for, like, if you get a club during the dramatic task, there's a complication, and you get to narrate what the complication is. But for the mechanical players, there's also a mechanical downside to that they get to wrestle with and try to figure out how they want to overcome. Moving on from that, we then have interludes as well. Interludes give purposeful time for storytelling, moving more towards the story time, narrative-driven end of things. Interludes allow your players to spend a little time giving some backstory or to describe the trek or whatever it is that they are describing, and they get rewarded with bennies. So it encourages narrative play by rewarding bennies, which is a common thing throughout Savage Worlds, rewarding narrativeness with bennies, whether it be something cool that you're doing, whether it be a hindrance, or whether it be an interlude. And bennies, again, are loved by everyone, both the narrative-driven players and the mechanics-driven players. The other thing about Savage Worlds is, again, kind of going back to that combat discussion, is this discussion of that there's no really, I'd say, filler combat compared to like other games like D&D, where there is a attrition system. You have to have lots of combat so that you can wear down the players before that final fight. Savage Worlds doesn't really do that. In fact, based on my research and the things I kind of found, and this is another video I've been working on, is that Savage Worlds really only wants you to really have like one, I would say about one combat per episode, if you would. If you think of Savage Worlds stuff as or per plot point, really. And there's some exceptions to that. But usually that last big combat of the plot point or of the episode or of the session even, that's the one time that Savage Worlds wants you to actually break out the minis and do a tactical combat. A lot of other times, the combats should really be solved in quick encounters. Try and get that quickly done, taken care of, because the combat doesn't really matter. This is good for not having filler combats has narrative importance, which means it's good for the narrative player. But having no filler combats also means that the combat itself tends to be fun and is going to be enjoyed by the mechanic players really heavily. So real quick, I'm gonna take a break real quick to see some of the things that are in the chat. Peter says, I have very good luck bringing both mechanics-driven and narrative-driven players in Spotlight in the same session. 100%. I think Savage Worlds, again, that's not the point. I think Savage Worlds allows you to do that. I think you can have both at the table and be successful at it. Players who don't know the details or rules of Savage Worlds have an easy time getting into the game as long as they understand bennies and exploding dice. Very fun game. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's actually true because if you just tell me what, if you have a GM who knows the system well, I would say that is one of the prerequisites to having a lot of fun, is having a GM who knows the system well. You can just describe what your character does, and the GM is going to be able to tell you what the result is or what you need to do, like roll or whatever, to get that result, and what the effects are of what you decide to do narratively. I find that I've had very much, again, like Pete, a lot of success bringing new players in who had no idea what they were doing by exploding dice and bennies, and that's all they needed to know. And they could even look at their character sheet and just see like the edges, which may not be described, but they get the general idea. Like, oh, can I use this edge to do this? Like, yeah, absolutely. This thing that says like, oh, I can do double shot, so I can like fire twice. Like, yeah, do this, you're good. And whereas mechanical players, they ask for different options. I can give them the cheat sheets and stuff about all the different options they have, and they get really into wanting to use those. Let's see here. Vigil says that he is about 70% mechanics. I'm playing a game, just not a miniature war game. Yep, sure. Troy says, Savage Worlds modularity, setting rules, and subsystems lets a group adjust quite radically the level of mechanical crunch. Absolutely, 100%, absolutely. Yeah, you can absolutely can adjust how much crunch based on the table, or even in certain situations, you can even adjust the crunch based on the player. Most of the time, I'd say it's probably more based on the group as a whole that you want to make those adjustments. But I think there is room for sometimes doing it on a per player basis as well. Bangle says, recently had a mass battle, and I think I'll use the result instead of quick encounters as it's more fleshed out for combat. Interesting. Yeah. Troy says he loves playing the house rules and experimenting with mechanics. There's a lot of good ones out there. Yeah. So with that, I did want to come in, we'll just kind of jump in then actually to setting rules, because they do shift the tone of the game a lot. You can take a setting rule like great damage and shift it much more heavily into the mechanical side of things, or you can do things like Born a Hero, or whatever the one is that says like you can like you can fail forward essentially by spending a benny. There's a lot of different rules that can let you kind of change the tone of your game from either very, very gritty or mechanical heavy, or into more narrative, pushing more into a narrative direction based solely on which setting rules you choose. And even GMs, as they're playing the game, they can say, maybe you aren't going to worry about the hazardous conditions and making mechanical changes there, or you could, or you can worry about stable platforms or not, or don't worry about them. There's a lot of different things that you can kind of do there to kind of adjust whether the feeling of your game based on those kind of rules and if you're going to implement them or not. And the last main thing I wanted to mention is character advancement. I love Savage's character advancement. I love character creation in general because does not require you to be combat focused at all, and yet you still get to participate in combat or be somewhat useful in combat, even without choosing a character that is mechanically driven. You can create a character purely based on the narrative. You can say, I want to take this edge or this skill based on the narrative that's up to this point, or you can create a character that is very mechanically driven, even if it's not combat mechanics. If you just want to have a character who's very good at noticing things, you can take the right edges and the right skills to do that and do that successfully. You can make a character that is very combat heavy and take all these cool things that let you do all these cool stuff inside of that combat encounter. So character advancement allows you to doesn't force you into being a combat focused character or just choosing a certain line of or a certain path, but lets you kind of go into multiple directions and decide which direction you want to do based on what your character has already. If you want to be more on the narrative side or the mechanical side. So I want to talk about a few examples real quick of games that I would tend to put on certain ends of the spectrum. These aren't necessarily like the ultimate ends of either spectrum. They're just more things that I think games that people might recognize more often, and I would put them on certain directions. So a game that I'd say is very mechanical heavy would be a game like Rifts. I think the way that I've read Rifts through, granted it's been the previous edition, but it feels very mechanic heavy. There's a lot of mechanics go in. There's heavy armor and there's like big damage and all these other things that I'm not really sure if I fully understand myself, but is an example of a mechanic heavy game inside Savage Worlds, and it runs really well, and people love that game. People love playing Savage Rifts. They prefer it. A lot of people say how much they prefer it to normal Rifts. I mean, it may not be everybody, but I know I hear that a lot. A game that I see as being like a game that people might recognize more and I would say maybe more on the narrative side is a game like ETU. Now, I think ETU definitely has its combat moments and definitely has points where it does need to be combat. But because the characters are college students, they really shouldn't be focused on their ability to fight off and wear armor and put kill our vests on and fire guns and what have you. So it does lend itself to, because you are playing as college students, into a more narrative game. And that's also followed up by like using tests. By tests, I mean like take it like at the end of a semester, you got to take a test to see if you could stay in school or not, that kind of thing. And then again, I'd say maybe more in the middle, but maybe a little bit more on the mechanical side, but not too much. The game is like Pathfinder for Savage Worlds. I think that's a good middle ground where it's got a lot of focus on combat, but it does also leave plenty of room for you to have a narrative focused character or a character that's not necessarily focused on combat. And you can really just still progress a character in Pathfinder like you would in a more narrative game. Again, that's going to also depend on what kind of campaign you're running and all those sorts of things. But I think those are some examples of like that kind of breakdown. I'd also put Deadlands in that middle ground where there's a lot of mechanics around the combat or mechanics of Deadlands, but there's also a lot of options and openings for doing things more narratively. The Deadlands actual plays, especially the one done by Sounds Like Crows, is very narrative and it sounds beautiful, but yet there is still plenty of points where they do use mechanics along the way. All right, looking both through here again. Journey says the playing cards were a great mechanic for Deadlands, but they don't feel like they fit for every setting. Yeah, I understand that feeling. The problem is, I guess for me, the cards themselves has turned into, for me, just like I see dice. I don't think of the cards as being thematic unless the cards themselves have a theme. So, I've got this deck that I'm going to use for Deadlands whenever I do it. It's a Bicycle Bourbon deck. The cards definitely have this like Western feel to them that I'm going to use for Deadlands. But the card numbers and stuff themselves, I don't really feel like are mechanical or thematic. I feel like they are just cards. They're just another system like dice. Dice, to a lot of people, feel like a board game, and so they see dice as a game. And also where there's a game element to it, but they see it as like this, they have certain feelings about it because that's dice. I think people have that same feeling about they feel that way about cards until they kind of at some point kind of get past it. I have this deck of cards that I use for cyberpunk games, although my daughter bit into them, so I think they need to be replaced because they're chewed through the box. Got these ones. These are just kind of more normal. I tend to use it for more fancy games. So, yeah. Point being is that I get it, but I also would say that at some point the cards become just a thing that you're doing. There are other games that aren't Savage Worlds that you use cards for initiative, like Dragonbane, I believe does as well. But their cards are, instead of using normal pack of cards, you got to use just numbers. So, yeah. All right. So, how do you manage then a table where you have a mixture of both mechanical players and narrative players? Because I will say I've had them at both at the same table, and it works just fine. It's not a big problem. The narrative players tend to bring up the mechanical players to a narrative level, but also the mechanical players tend to bring some needed thought process to who should do what to the table. So first off, if you're doing both, you should avoid trash fights or filler fights. Tactical players enjoy combat when it matters, and narrative players, they hate it when it doesn't matter. So if you have random or unimportant fights, you should just use do quick encounters and move on. And I think both your players are going to be okay with that. And the other thing that is one of the rules that people say a lot, and that's to make sure that you're giving out plenty of bennies. Not giving out bennies, being stingy with your bennies as GM is going to kill the game for both the narrative players and the mechanical players. If you want both to succeed, give out bennies. I think the general guidance I've heard is about like one benny. I think I heard like 1 benny per hour. I can't remember if it's like 1 benny per hour or like 1 benny per person per hour. I would probably lean closer to that 1 benny per person per hour to make sure that people have plenty of time to use them. Yeah. So looking back here, let's see here. Benkel says, thematically, no, but as mechanics of initiative, it is really good to keep a complex action system running quickly and less bookkeeping. I find that even though you're dealing out cards every round and instead of just rolling once, I find that it keeps the narrative flowing and keeps players engaged more. And then instead, I play D&D at least, I'd say on average once every 2 weeks. Sometimes like this week I'm going to be playing twice. And one of the things I've noticed is that when I re-roll initiative, it's like, okay, everybody roll for initiative. It's like, okay, roll. Now I just have to wait for the GM to call on me so I can tell him what my initiative roll is. I have to wait for him to get everyone else's. And then we can start and I can find out where I'm going. Whereas I get to find out as I'm dealing cards, as the GM's dealing out cards, I figure out where I'm going. Like, oh, you got that. Okay, that's good. That's good for you. Oh, what do I get? I get this, and seeing all the cards that come up. Okay, what's the monster's going to get? Okay, that's fine. We're good. Do I want to spend a penny on it? It keeps players engaged, and therefore it feels less like a slog. And it lets multiple things happen and it allows more, I think, more specialized things to happen. Let's see here. Troy says, what I love about using cards is they generate results on 2 axes, a number and a suit. That gives it much design space to do stuff with. Yeah. Especially like things like dramatic tasks where they say, okay, with the club, you actually have a problem that comes up with you get dealt with the club. You might go early. You might have the ace of clubs, which means you get to go really early, but you have a club, which means you have a complication that you are, it's going to affect how you succeed. Peter says, if you don't want a lot of rules drag, just use quick encounters and dramatic tasks. Yep. And also just as a GM, you don't have to use all those specialized rules. Savage Worlds does a good job. And again, I have to remember that Savage Worlds is a toolbox setting, toolbox RPG. They put a lot of different rules in there for people who want to use them. You don't have to use them. You can ignore them. And there's some rules that people just don't ever use at all. I saw a comment today on my armor video, because on the armor video I talked about armor stacking. And they're like, well, that doesn't sound very much fun. It's like, oh yeah. The thing is that it's possible. Players sometimes want to try to do it. It's available there for people who want to do it. But you know how many times I've seen people try stack armor? Never. I've never had a player try stack armor. And when it comes to the other things about the video, which is like called shots and not covering parts of your body and stuff, it's like, yeah, that might be a little more mechanical heavy, but it also allows for you to be narratively important. Like, oh, I want to shoot them in the in this one part of the body that isn't covered by armor, because that the art for this guy shows him that he's not wearing a helmet, and that has both narrative and mechanical consequences. So with all that being said, again, this is a shorter video. The general kind of thought process I had was that Savage handles the dichotomy of mechanics-driven and narrative-driven players by providing what I would say is a medium crunch or a medium rules framework, where narrative choices have a mechanical importance. And a lot of mechanical importances and mechanical options that are in Savage Worlds have the potential to be narrative as well. It allows players to create characters that are mathematically optimized, using different edges and skills and whatever, but also allows the narrative players to influence fights. It allows high level abstractions and allows players to spend bennies to even just change the story. So I think Savage Worlds does a really good job just kind of taking those two sides and really blending them really well together. It's why I think that Savage Worlds actual plays are actually like some of the most fun actual plays to listen to. So if you, by the way, to all the people who are not listening to actual plays, some that or want to know some, I would recommend the Wildcards ETU actual play and the Sounds Like Crow actual play. Those are both really well done. They sound really good. The big thing for me is it needs to sound good. If it doesn't sound good, I'm not gonna even bother. So try to find two ones that sound good. I will say also that the ones that even that do sound good, sometimes they don't sound correct because Zoom calls and the gaps sometimes affect things. Vangle says, I sometimes think about dealing cards face down and call down the value, so the players will have to act without knowing how fast their characters go. I think that slows things down a bit. Yeah, I have thought about that as well. And I think I decided against it for two reasons. One, I prefer my players have the information at hand. So I tell my players, not immediately, but like, after they hit and then fail, or after they try to hit someone, after their first attempt, essentially, like their parry and their toughness. So I'm gonna attack the person. I got 12. It's like, yep, that hits with a raise. His parry is 8, right? I like players having the information because also I'm playing with information about their characters. On top of that, I like players to know, also allow players to, I like the idea of players working together. So if a player has a 10 and the other player has a 9, I want them to be able to take their turn together, essentially. As long as they're still using their actions together, I want them to be able to kind of coordinate together to do certain things. Whereas if they're, if they don't know if they're going right after each other, they can't really do that. They have to like wait their turn. So I like just players having the knowledge, and also like by having the knowledge, they also get to decide or have a more informed decision on if they want to spend a Benny to draw a new card. So I prefer that method as well, personally. I will say it might also give them a reason not to draw a new card because they're like, oh, I know that the monsters have an ace of spades, so I'm never going to beat that. So they may choose not to, whereas they might choose one otherwise, but then just feels bad. So, if I can avoid a feels bad moment of like spending a Benny that was useless, I'm going to try to push that way. So I personally don't do that. I don't do that on purpose. I do reveal all the cards, including the enemies, on when they're going, as well. Well, again, I know this is a shorter night tonight. I thank you all for coming and hanging out and talking about this. If you were watching the video on demand version of this video, if you have insights into this balance of narrative drivenness versus mechanic driven players, and how if you have opinions about how Savage Worlds does an excellent job, you mind them, leave a comment down below. One of the things that got me thinking about this is that I've been looking at a lot of the other games that come out recently that almost from the outside feel like they're competing with Savage Worlds. Games like Outgunned and the Year Zero engine. And what I found is that games like the Year Zero engine are more mechanically driven and actually are more mechanically driven than I want them to be. But then also, then the flip side, games like Outgunned are more narratively driven than I'm interested in being. And so I feel like Savage Worlds fits in that really good place in the middle between these mechanic driven and narrative driven games. And I just like to analyze the game and talk about like why that is. Why does Savage Worlds does a good job doing it like this? So I'd love to hear your guys' comments, hear more thoughts about that. And maybe in the future I will make a video talking about it. That's like a proper like scripted video that I'll do to talk about that discussion. Until next time, everybody, again, thank you for hanging out and talking, and I'll see you all next week. Cheers, everybody.